When this all started, I was, and I still am, just terrified to repeat the mistakes of history. So I started reading every book I could about an epidemic. And then I read a book on yellow fever in 1876 in New Orleans. And what struck me there is that, there were all these theories of it was only a disease that affected poor people, it affected, not me, right? And that was a complete disaster. Out of that, Tulane School of Public Health was born. And the New Orleans Health Department, I think, became more of a thing. If you look at the city charter, when I took this job, I read the city charter, and it was hilarious to me because it was clearly written after an epidemic, because it gives powers to the health department to quarantine, and it's very specific, and it has all these diseases that don't exist today. But that was a lesson learned. Coronavirus itself, the first cases started coming out of China right around New Year's Eve. No one in the country thought there was community spread, ergo we had Mardi Gras. So it was a Monday at noon. I think I still have the sticky note that I wrote it on. And I got the call from Joe Cantor, and he said, we have our first case. And so I listened to it. This was not a classic presentation. It seems from the data we have that the virus that came to Louisiana came from the Northeast. Was there one person who brought it? Maybe. Were there 50 people who brought it? Maybe. And then that big old super spreader event that is Mardi Gras just made it explode. And I said, we are behind. This is the tip of the iceberg. This is not going to show up on a plane. It is already here. There's nothing soft about public health. You have to have a backbone. You have to use hard data and science to make really complex, difficult decisions. You got to do it quickly, and you got to be decisive. When the feds called and said, we're going to do these drive-through testing sites in a couple of cities, do you want to be one? We said yes right away, and then within 3 days, we had it up and running. The first testing was the federally, supported drive-through testing. That this wasn't going to cut it for a lot of people, right? The first person you saw was a guy in fatigues with a gun. Early on, it was a little nerve-wracking. We pushed back, against the feds, saying this isn't going to work. Let us do it locally, and eventually they did. We realized the virus was disproportionately hitting residents of color, generally on the lower income end. So we had to bring the testing to them. We devised a way to do that really quickly. And at first the feds, I think they kind of maybe were a little taken aback or maybe offended that we didn't necessarily like their method. And they sort of said, okay, good luck. And I showed up at Xavier, and I almost burst into tears because there was a line around the block an hour before we opened. And one of the women was an 89-year-old lady who had walked a half a mile to be tested. And I knew that she wasn't going to be able to get a test any other way. And I thought, if she's the only lady that I have done something for, this is already a success. And then pretty soon thereafter, this is what everybody in the country is doing, because they realize it's the right thing to do. And tens of thousands of tests later, here we are. I like to say this is the best job I never knew I wanted. So I am born and raised New Orleans. I'm the oldest of 8. My parents adopted the other 7. So grew up in a household that had siblings of all races, all abilities. And so it was a really unusual way to grow up, but it was wonderful. I got into medicine because I studied sociology, which is very, very similar to public health, except I didn't know it at the time. And I got into emergency medicine because it was the closest to sociology and social justice and all the things I had grown, and it was Charity Hospital, and everything was the front lines. Every death I take personally. How could I have prevented that? What did I not do? But I also take personally the loss of people's economic livelihoods, right? How can I keep that oyster shucker employed? How can I keep that gig worker from being out on the street, right? So all of that sort of together, and then trying to make policy and trying to get testing and trying to get resources and where are the swabs? So it was a lot of chaos. It's basically like working in the trauma room every single day for months. If you can hold out a little bit longer, it looks like there's an end to this. I hope that will get people through the worst of it. Who we are afterwards, I don't really know.
Better.
I hope so.
Of course.
I think so. Yeah.